Wondering to what extent you should be engaged in the national ocean policy work, I would recommend that on the federal level, find a contact. You can certainly work through your federal agency friends. You can contact the CMTS just to monitor what the discussion is. On the regional level, again, because we know everybody's real busy, see if you do have somebody that you can work with that can represent your interests. In some respects, you just at least have somebody in the room to express and bring expertise for maritime transportation. Our next speaker is Mr. Daniel Breton. He is the Director of Marine Navigation for the Canadian Coast Guard. I will say straight out that the Canadian Coast Guard was ahead of us in developing an e-navigation strategic plan. So when we got together in the U.S. to develop a similar plan, and there's a flyer out there about it, in fact, we basically threw the Canadian one on the table and said, do you think we could just take the cover off of it and put ours on top of it? It was that good. So we hope we, when we did ours, that we didn't embarrass you, sir. But thank you for being here. Mr. Breton.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Je suis très content d'être ici aujourd'hui. I'm very happy to be here today to talk about e-navigation. And I'll try to make my speech as succinct as possible, but as clear as possible as well, so you can truly understand what we've been doing up in e-navigation in Canada. So an overview of what I'm going to be talking today is a little bit about our historical development, because it's very important to understand where we come from so that we can chart a bright future. I'll then talk about our e-navigation vision strategy that Helen has been talking a little bit about, and that has been guiding our work for the past little while, and I hope for the future as well. I'll be talking about our achievements so far, because I think we're starting to move in Canada from a definition mode to an actual implementation mode, and that's important to note as we move forward in implementing e-navigation. I'll talk also about our e-navigation concept of operation, which is essentially trying to bring the concept of e-navigation, which, as we heard before, a lot of people have different interpretation about what is actually e-navigation, and we're trying to bring it down to concrete pieces so that people can get it and then help implementation as we move forward. And I'll talk about I'll give you a glimpse of our national portal, which will actually anchor our e-navigation service delivery into the future. And then about next steps, because clearly that's only the beginning. But before I get to the heart of the subject, I'd like to tell you immediately the takeaways of my presentation. Unlike Lee Alexander, I don't want to give you a test or anything like that. I'm going to give you the answers immediately. So Canada has a long history dealing with e-navigation. We have implemented a number of initiatives in one shape or another for many years now, and this has essentially is the root of our future. Key to those initiatives is actually the collaboration among all our partners in e-navigation, and some of them are listed on this slide, and that's very important and dear to my heart in moving forward for e-navigation. The government might not always be part of, or the instigator of those initiatives. However, the government was and will always be there because we're a service provider. We need to provide the information that makes it critical to e-navigation into the future. If we're not there, e-navigation is going to go one way, like different format, different environment. But you do need, it's very close to my heart that we do need authoritative information, and the government is there to provide that. So what has been done in Canada so far in e-navigation? Well, if you actually look on the left-hand side, you see the screenshot of a portal. This is a portal that's named MARINFO and has been used in our Quebec region on the St. Lawrence River. This portal makes use of web services to connect PPUs. The users of the PPUs essentially download up-to-date operational data from the website on the state and conditions of the waterways, notice to shipping, shoals and bottom surveys, buoy endings, ice breaking, a lot of ice this year, I can tell you, that's a very popular hit, our fleet of operation. All of this information is downloaded by pilots before they actually go to sea. Real-time information on water level is actually broadcasted via AIS messages. So essentially, the PPUs are fed with good government information before they sail and once they sail as well. On the right-hand side, what you see is a screenshot of what's being used on the St. Lawrence Seaway, where AIS messages are being used, and each lock of the seaway broadcasts real-time information about lock orders, water levels, weather data, including visibility. Information is available via AIS messages and from the internet. There's both the push and the pull technology using in that environment. Let's go out east in Newfoundland, where an initiative called Smart Bay, more precisely in Placentia Bay, where smart environmental buoys provide real-time and archived data for weather and sea state forecasts. This is in place now. More on the right, a bridge air gap system with continuous monitoring of bridge heights using tide gauges and differential GPS. Essentially, the Port of Halifax calculate the air gap clearance of vessels and provide the information to pilots. There's also an AIS unit located at the center of the bridge for better positioning of the ships. Not on a picture now, but more on the western region here, up in British Columbia, a system called AVADEP, which is essentially provide information to mariners about the determination of maximum draft and best sailing times, S57 ENC updates, forecasts of available water depth, water current flow, etc. All of that information is available to the river pilots, Port Metro Vancouver, which is a key port over there, and shipping companies as well. Those initiatives have mostly been implemented on an ad hoc matter. The challenge is, how do we take those solutions and bring them nationally? How do we make sure that the levels of service are actually consistent throughout the country? So in 2008 and 9, the Canadian Coast Guard started a vision strategy about e-navigation. That's where we essentially committed to say, you know what, this is the future. E-navigation, we need to go there. But we need to make sure that everybody is actually with us, and we need to communicate this vision. So we started to do we base our vision and strategy on 4 key pillars. The first one, user interaction. Because it's actually very critical that the users are at the center of e-navigations. Gone are the days where solutions were imposed to users or will be imposed to users. Users are at the heart of e-navigation in Canada. The second one is called stakeholders coordination. And that's essentially realizing that the Canadian Coast Guard, although a key provider of information and services on Canadian waterways, is not alone in that. We couldn't that alone. We need Environment Canada, we need the Hydrographic Service, we need the Canadian Border Services Agency, we need the St. Lawrence Seaway Corporation, we need all of those bodies that interact with mariners or provide services to mariners to come together. And that was key to success to where we are today. The third pillar is called organizational preparedness. Because our organizations like the Canadian Coast Guard has not been geared up in the past to actually provide information to mariners. We've used to provide services. We used to provide buoys. We still do it. Buoys, icebreaking services, search and rescue services. But the very fact of having information to be sent to mariners on board vessels for their use was quite a different shift of mind for a lot of people within the Coast Guard. So the preparedness of our organization to actually support this technological turn is key to my mind. The fourth pillar is essentially what I call strategic direction. Because we actually need to plan for the future. What will be tomorrow's Canadian Coast Guard in an e-navigation environment? What will be our role in providing buoys, in providing traditional services? How do we prepare for that? How do we make sure that we plan for the future? What will the vessel traffic services officers, of which there are 400 of them, will be doing in an e-navigation environment? Clearly, they have a role, but is that role the same that what they're doing now? How do we plan for these people to actually be ready for when there is a true e-navigation environment? That's going to take a lot of time to get around, and we need to prepare for that, because it's coming. So the future is coming. What do we want it to be for our organization? Those are key questions that we need to answer. So what we've done once we've got our strategy set up, we actually, and as Dr. Alexander mentioned earlier, in 2009 and 10, we started a user needs study. That was a comprehensive study across Canada, both web and face-to-face discussions with key stakeholders from coast to coast. That led the path to what you see on the middle right of the screen, the required services matrix that we've developed in 2010 and 11. That essentially lists over 55 service needs that the mariners have been identifying through that survey, and we've plotted it over the different navigational areas in Canada. So we've essentially separated the country in separate zones that have unique challenges for e-navigation services. We've then sat down with mariners and we've prioritized each of their services in terms of what does it mean for them, how important is it? Because e-navigation is an evolution. It's going to take time for us to get there. It's going to take money. It's going to take a lot of effort. We will not be able to do it all at the same time. We need to prioritize. We need to put the level of effort where it needs to be and where it pays more, both in terms of safety and in terms of efficiency. So that matrix, essentially, strong with that, and with the partnership that we had established with our partners within the federal government, we've developed what we now call a vision, an e-navigation vision for Canada, where all of those federal agencies come together and agree that they want to move ahead on e-navigation. That's very key to my heart, because e-navigation could be done probably very quickly at a very high cost, but it's unsure to what extent it will be adopted by the users. But if we transform ourselves over time, and where everybody is planning for the future and all playing the same song, we're going to get there much faster than we think and at a much cheaper cost at the end of the day. So the vision for Canada that all of the federal organizations essentially committed to is widespread use of e-navigation in Canada by mariners and shore authorities for greater safety, security, efficiency, and environmental protection. Now, to implement that vision, we've started to chart the future. We started to work very concretely in 2011 and 12. And you're going to hear some similar technology here that's been using from the IMO strategy. So in 2011 and 12, we've done a gap analysis. For each services that was listed on this required services matrix, we've again sat down with the users and we've looked at with the stakeholders and said, where are the gaps? What are you getting today that you think you're going to need in the future that the government does not provide at this point in time? And that's very telling, because a lot of our regions are ahead in some elements of information and others are not. So there are gaps, but there are also a lot of places where we've actually implemented good success stories that can be replicated in other parts of the country without recreating the wheel. If that's true in Canada, that's true throughout the world. It is my fundamental belief that e-navigation solutions exist somewhere on the globe for just about every requirement. The trick is to actually harmonize them, implement them, and make sure that we don't recreate each our own solutions, which is then going to generate a lot of years of grief and then wasted, as far as I'm concerned, because there's a lot of gains to be getting from e-navigation. So the gap analysis was then published in what we call the National e-Navigation webpage. Not much of a big revolutionary system here, but just essentially a repository of where all the Canadian information exists to support mariners into one single webpage, so that's easily retrievable. So everything is all there, it's just that nobody could actually find it. If you actually put in a common webpage, it helps focus level of effort. We've then moved on in 2012 and 13 to our concept of operations, which I'll talk to in a minute more specifically. And then we started to standardize data sources and services. And I say started because that's going to take a lot of time, because a lot of people are developing systems right, left, and center with their own data dictionaries and their own ways of communicating information and all of that. And we need to standardize that. We need to standardize that within Canada. We need to standardize that within North America and within the globe. That's going to be a challenge as we move forward. We then started to do an implementation plan for a portal, and again, I'll talk to you about that in a minute. But what's key in all of that as well, in 2013 and 14, is we started to address policy gaps that we're seeing, because as e-navigation move forward, it's going to change the way how we need to do business in the future. We need to frame that. We need to guide that. And AIS policy was seen as an immediate requirement because a lot of people are coming with bright ideas right, left, and center and broadcasting information over the AIS network. At some point, that needs to be managed. So we started to develop a policy, and the policy will be promulgated within a month's time in Canada that will help define what goes on the AIS network, what does not go on the AIS network. This is Canada's e-navigation concept. So in Canada, it's been recognized that e-navigation must be driven by user needs. At the same time, the Government of Canada is promoting the concept of open government, which main goals are to offer government data and information in a more useful format to enable stakeholders to leverage it in both innovative and value-added ways. So the concept of operations for e-navigation in Canada is built based on those two main premises. Users are expecting services and information for all Canadian main waterways. They want the information through one portal, 24/7. They prefer a single point of access to rapidly get the information they need with the assurance that the information is the official information. They want an open source platform and service-oriented architecture applications. They also believe that for now, AIS is the way to push information out to users within the local area. So these points summarize how we will define and implement e-navigation in Canada over the next few years, in close collaboration with our partners, as I mentioned. In other words, we're going to make the data available, and we will let the industry take it on, develop the technology and the tools to be used by the mariners, essentially. The Canadian government is not going to start developing applications to push on board vessels. We need the leadership of the users to actually take our information, make good use of it for safer and more efficient navigation. This slide gives you a glance or a mock-up of a mock-up of our portal, which is actually in development. So essentially, the data will be provided on this single maritime information portal to allow easy consultation by mariners when planning their voyage. The data will be provided via 4 different methods to answer different needs. Navigation by location, where efficient web pages with all relevant information by location. Download datasets, where file downloads will be available. Connect to services with direct connections to our information services. And through an interactive map, through an online GIS applications with multiple layers. In order to populate that portal, we have priority services. We heard about Maritime Services Portfolio. I talked to you about the required services matrix. All of that has been prioritized. So what we're going to be moving on, when I talk about moving to the implementation phase, is in partnership with our e-navigation stakeholders, with our partners within the federal government. We're going to start focusing on key information, and 7 of them are listed here. Wind, wave, air and water temperature, atmospheric pressures. Ice chart, clearly this year. Water level, both real-time and forecast. Status of AIDS navigations, GPS, DGPS. Bridge air gap. Newly discovered hazard, shoals, wrecks, or dangers, and notice to shipping. Those were all key services identified through the users sitting down with them, and through government as well, to see what difference we can actually make in implementing e-navigation. So what's next for us? Well, we think our concept of operation is the way to go to make progress on e-navigation. Let's remember that e-navigation is all about the data. So it actually seems fitting that we make this data available to users so then they can leverage it, make good use of it. So we're going to continue with our concept of operations, and we're going to be adding more information to the portal and through our AIS network so that they can get it live as they sail through Canadian waters. So my conclusion here, the Canadian success to date has been due to collaboration and communication with key domestic partners and stakeholders. That's going to continue because that's the key to success. We're also going to continue to work closely with the IMO, with international organizations, as well as the U.S. Coast Guard and their partners within the U.S. to develop and coordinate e-navigation implementation. Partnership is the way to go. Working together is the way to go. We're quite open to that, and we're going to continue that into the future. That's essentially the Canadian planning work so far in e-navigation, and I will be more than happy to answer any questions after the conference or after the meeting and all of that. Thank you.
Our last presenter of this morning's panel is Mr. Quang An, and I want to make note that in your program, his name is backwards. So please, when you address him, it is Mr. Ang. However, what you don't see there is that he's also a Master Mariner, so he is Captain Ang.